Denzel Washington was walking through the city streets on a late afternoon. After a long day, he was ready to head home, but a small commotion up ahead caught his attention. A group of young men was gathered around an elderly man sitting in the corner, hurling insults at him. The man's clothes were tattered, his skin cracked from the cold, and his eyes weary with exhaustion. Beside him sat a small brown terrier, its fur matted and unkempt, but its gaze filled with unwavering loyalty. The man was hunched over, a rusted tin can in front of him, containing only a few scattered coins. But instead of offering him help, the teenagers were mocking him. "Hey, old man, you're ruining the place. Look at you. You're worthless. People like you should be wiped off the streets. Why didn't you just die already? Maybe you should have never been born." Denzel's brows furrowed. He exhaled deeply and stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and firm. "You mock this man, but it's because of him that you have the freedom to walk these streets today." One of the teens scoffed, turning toward Denzel with a look of disbelief. "What are you talking about? He's just a bum." Denzel's gaze darkened as he motioned toward the old man. "You get to walk freely, go to school, hang out with your friends, all because men like him fought for you." A brief silence fell over the group as they exchanged uncertain glances. Denzel continued. "He risked his life in a war so that you could have a future. He didn't know you, he didn't owe you anything, but he fought anyway, and this is how you repay him." The weight of his words settled over them. The teens fell silent, their expressions shifting from arrogance to shame. A few seconds later, without another word, they turned and walked away. Denzel crouched down in front of the elderly man. The man looked up, his eyes filled with surprise. "My name is Denzel," he said gently. "What's yours?" The man cleared his throat, his voice weak and raspy. I'm Samuel." Denzel glanced at the few coins scattered in front of him, and then met Samuel's tired eyes. "You don't deserve this, Samuel. Tell me your story." Samuel took a deep breath. It was time for the world to hear the story of a forgotten hero. Samuel lowered his head. For a few seconds, he remained silent, his hands clasped together, trembling slightly. The cold had seeped into his skin, but what truly froze was his soul. Denzel waited. He didn't rush him. It would take time for Samuel to start speaking. Samuel took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "I went to war a long time ago." His gaze drifted into the distance, as if he were getting lost in his past. "I was young. I was proud. I was going to fight for my country. I thought I would be a hero. I believed my country would be grateful to me." He paused for a moment, cleared his throat, but the words still came out with difficulty. "But when I came home, nothing was as I left it." Denzel listened intently. Samuel's voice shook as he continued. "I lost everything in that war. My brothers, my closest friends, the explosions, the screams, the smoke. I still hear them. I can't forget those smells. I saw so much death that after a while, even death felt ordinary." He ran his hands over his face, pressing his fingers against his eyes. "But the real pain started when I came back." Samuel clenched his trembling hands into fists on his knees. "My wife left me. She was with my best friend. Every day at war, I held on to her picture just to survive. That picture kept me going. When I came home, it was already in the trash." Denzel's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. But Samuel wasn't done. "My daughter, my beautiful little girl. I used to braid her hair. I used to sing her to sleep. When I came back, she had grown up, but she looked at me like a stranger. 'You're a monster,' she said. She slammed the door in my face, and she never opened it again." Samuel's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but they never fell. He had gone so long without crying that he had forgotten how. "My mind shattered. Every night I woke up screaming from nightmares. I avoided people. I couldn't get a job. The government didn't help me, and the people I fought for never even looked back at me. In my own country, the one I bled for, I was forgotten." Denzel inhaled sharply. There was so much he wanted to say, but he let Samuel continue. Samuel lowered his head. One day, I had my worst night. That was the last time I tried. Denzel frowned slightly. Samuel's voice grew faint. I walked into a store and asked for a job. The woman at the counter looked me up and down. My coat was worn, my shoes scuffed, my hands trembled slightly. She frowned and said, "Sorry, we're not hiring." But when a young man in a sharp suit walked in right after me, she welcomed him with a smile. That's when I understood. They were never going to take me. Denzel could feel the rejection and pain sinking deep into his bones. That night, I thought about ending everything. Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly. Samuel's voice cracked. I walked to a bridge, stood there for hours. No one noticed. No one asked, "Are you okay?" And then, I wasn't alone anymore. Samuel lifted his head slightly, looking at his small dog. The terrier wagged its tail gently, as if understanding the story. I found this little guy on the streets, or maybe he found me. That night, he curled up beside me. He looked at me like he knew. Like he was telling me, if you go, at least don't go alone. And because of him, I stepped away from the edge. Samuel closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. Since that day, the only thing I have left is this little friend. Denzel looked at the small dog, then back at Samuel. Life had a cruel way of placing the heaviest burdens on those who had already carried too much. Even he deserves a better life than I do, Samuel said, his voice breaking. Denzel leaned in slightly and spoke softly. "Samuel, you are a hero. Your war isn't over, but you don't have to fight it alone." Samuel looked up at Denzel. For the first time in years, someone was truly looking at him, seeing him, listening to him. But listening wasn't enough to bring a man back to life. Denzel had to give him a reason, and he had a plan. Denzel looked straight into Samuel's eyes and spoke firmly. "You're coming with me tonight." Samuel raised his eyebrows. "What? No, Denzel shook his head. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. But tonight, you're not sleeping on the streets." Samuel hesitated for a moment, then glanced down at his small dog. He noticed how the little terrier was shivering in the cold. He took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, but on one condition. My dog comes too." Denzel smiled. "Of course, he does." That night, Samuel took a warm bath, put on clean clothes, and for the first time in years, ate a hot meal. In Denzel's home, if only for a few hours, he remembered a feeling he had long forgotten: safety. But Denzel knew this wasn't enough. The next morning, when Samuel opened his eyes, it took him a moment to remember where he was. It felt strange waking up in a warm bed after so long. But as he sat down for breakfast, Denzel gave him unexpected news. "Samuel, I found you a job." Samuel's eyes widened. "What? A job? What kind of job?" Denzel smiled. "At an animal shelter. Someone like you, who understands pain and loneliness, will be perfect for taking care of them. I know you'll give them the love they need." Samuel nodded slowly. He had felt useless for so long. Then, Denzel pulled out his wallet and placed a check on the table. $10,000 to help you get back on your feet. Samuel's hands trembled. "Denzel, I can't accept this." Denzel shook his head. "This isn't charity. It's a thank you. Because you fought for us. Now someone needs to fight for you." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. He stayed silent for a few moments. Then, for the first time in years, he smiled. That day, Samuel started his new job at the animal shelter. He even brought his dog with him. At first, his hands shook. "What if I fail?" he thought. But as he cared for the animals, the emptiness inside him began to fade. Months later, Samuel was no longer begging on the streets. He had rented his own place with his own paycheck. One day, Denzel stopped by the shelter. Samuel walked up to him and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Denzel smiled warmly. "You always deserved that chance, Samuel." And with that, a forgotten hero found his way back to life.